Okay, good evening, guys. Hope I'm audible to you. Please let me know whether you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, thank you, Miller. So, today I plan to do this quick session to finish off SLFRS 16 leases. So, last week, in last Sunday, I completed the theoretical areas along with questions. If I'm not mistaken, we counted around 30 questions for SLFRS 16 and same like we had for the revenue standard. So I have covered almost, not actually almost all the areas which are relating to your exam. And today, what I wanted to do is some past papers. So accordingly, there were three past papers apart from 2024 December. There were three past papers where we had questions from SLFRS 16. So within this session, what I'm planning to do is all these three past papers. Okay. So when you go through those past papers, you will feel what we discussed in the class is tested as it is in the paper. So please take the note and the standard book to a close by so we can refer them while we are doing the questions. Fine. So I just went through the past paper analysis. Hope you all also have that. According to the past paper analysis, in 2023 June, they have tested uh, SLFRS 16, again 2022 December, then 2021 February exam. So in those three times, they have tested SLFRS 16, where in all the three times they have tested lease modifications. Okay, so if someone asks from me what is the most critical area that the examiner can test with relation to the SLFRS 16 leases is lease modifications. Now, if we just recall our memory on lease modifications, so when I was discussing the lease modification, I first started with remeasurement of the lease liability. There I told you, I draw a diagram and I told you when we are going for a remeasurement, in two situations we have to use the original discounting rate. That means the discounting rate at the commencement date of the lease. And in all other situations, we have to use a revised rate of discount. Revised rate of the discount means the discount rate. It can be the implicit interest rate or the incremental borrowing rate at the effective date of modification. Therefore, that's what I firstly discussed. We worked out two or three questions from that. So then I moved on to the lease modifications. So I just told you modifications to the lease agreement is identified as lease modifications. So that modifications can happen as a change in the scope. That means number of underlying assets. Okay, the quantity of underlying assets. It can be a change to that. It can be a change to the lease payment. It can be a change to both of them. Why? Once the scope is increased, when you add one or more underlying assets, you will have to pay more. You will have to pay more. And if you remove one or more underlying assets, you will have to pay less. Accordingly, when the scope changes, the consideration or the payment will be also changed, right? Hope you are clear. Then it can be a change due to the change in the lease term, okay, and also it might be a change due to the change in residual value guarantee, okay. Likewise, we identified set of changes. Sometimes I told you without a change in the scope, the consideration can be changed. Why? Even for the same property, the lessor, who is the supplier, might increase or decrease the rent value depending on the situations, right? So once we identify a lease modification, the first question we have to ask is, are we going to account this lease modification as a new separate lease? That's the question we have to ask. Are we going to account this lease modification as a new separate lease? When answering that question, we had to look at two things. We can account a lease modification as a new separate lease according to paragraph number 44 of SLFRS 16 only if there is an addition to the scope. That means only if there is an increase in the scope, and alongside the increase in the scope, the consideration also need to be increased. But that increase in the consideration should commensurate the market prices. Clear? So it need to always commensurate the market prices, or else in SLFRS 15 terms, it should reflect the standalone selling price in the market. Why? To account for as a new separate lease, we need to check whether, when determining the price, whether there are any impact from the original lease agreement. Are they giving us a discount due to the previous lease agreement? If they are giving a discount, then it is not actually a separate lease, it is a part of the original lease. Right? Therefore, to account as a new separate lease, we need to look at, okay, we need to check whether scope is increased and the consideration is increased. That means both. At the same time, the consideration increase should commensurate the market prices. Market prices. So, if both conditions are met, we will account such modification as a new separate lease. If not, what we have to do? If not, we just draw the arrow to the remeasurement of lease liability accordingly. As per paragraph number 45, we have to remeasure the lease liability, the revised lease payments using revised discounting rate, and then we had to do that remeasurement adjustment. At that time, I told you we have to look at the same time whether we are using original rate or the revised rate. And additionally, we move to paragraph number 46, where it speaks about the reduction in the scope, where we had to proportionately reduce the right of use asset and the lease liability. There we followed two things. Step number one is to proportionately reduce the right of use asset and the lease liability. Accordingly, we had to recognize a gain on full or partial termination on lease. Then as step number two, we had to do a remeasurement. We had to discount the revised lease payments using the revised discounting rate and then recognize the remeasurement impact. So those 44, 45 and 46 are the key paragraph references that we referred when accounting for the lease modifications. So having that understanding, having that memory recalled, let's go with the past paper questions. Let me share my screen. Okay, let's start with question number 3 in 2023 June. Sorry, yes, 2023 June. Is my screen visible? Tell me.
Yes.
Okay, good. Now let's see this one. On 1st April 2023, the lease terms of one of the lease agreements of CSL was changed. Now you can see there is a change in what? There is a change in the lease terms. So change in the lease term is identified as a lease modification. Okay. Then you need to think. Now you got an idea. This is a lease modification. Now you need to think, are we going to account this as a separate lease or not? Please tell me, are we going to account this as a separate lease or not? Tell me. This is a change in lease term. Are we going to account this as a separate lease?
Since there's no change in scope, it's just a modification.
Yes, exactly. So there is no any change in the scope, no any underlying assets are increased, right? Therefore, this is not accounted as a separate lease. We have to remeasure the lease liability and recognize the remeasurement impact. Clear? Now let's read. The gross carrying value of the right of use asset and accumulated amortization of the asset as at 31st March 2023, okay, 31st March 2023 was 24.97 million and 4.99 million. Lease liability as at 31st March 2023 was 20.41 million. Per the revised lease terms, okay, per the revised lease terms, 7 million of annual lease rentals is due on 1st April 2023 and 1st April 2024. 7.5 million annual lease rentals is due on 1st April 2025 and 2026. The company currently pays annual rentals on time. That means this is a rent paid in advance. Why? All the payments are due on 1st April. That means at the year beginning. That means payments are in advance. That means payments are in advance. Clear? The incremental borrowing rate as at 1st April 2023 was 15% per annum. The remaining useful life of the right of use asset was only 4 years as at 1st April 2023. Required. Discuss how to recognize the lease referred to above in financial statements of CSL during the year ending 31st March 2023. So they are asking you how to record this in year ending 31st March 2024. That means this starts from 1st April 2023 and ends on 31st March 2024, right? That's how it goes. So now you know this is the lease remeasurement. Therefore, let's work it out. Let's work it out. I believe that you all are also working with me. Please work along with me, then it will be easy for you all. Okay. Now you can see, I guess, here. I have the carrying amount of lease liability before the lease modification. It is 20.41 million. Then right of use asset carrying amount before lease modification, it's 19.98. How I got that? I have the gross carrying amount 24.97. From that, I am removing the accumulated amortization, right? Then this is a discussion question. This is a discussion question. So what you need to first mention, maybe working currently what you need to first mention. So point one, you need to mention this is a lease modification. This is a lease modification not accounted as a separate lease. Not accounted as a separate lease. Why? Because there is no any change in scope. So you can refer para 44. You can refer para 44 to this one, right? So this is what you first need to mention. Then you can mention in point 2, as this is not accounted as a separate lease, the lease liability shall be remeasured. The lease liability shall be remeasured on 1st April 2023. On 1st April 2023, an account as per para, which para? 45. This is what you need to secondly mention. Lease liability එක remeasure කරන්න ඕනි කියලා කියනවා. Right? So that's how you need to approach this question. Then you need to work it out. So we have the before modification carrying amounts. Now we need to calculate the after modification carrying amounts, right? So accordingly, to calculate that, I am remeasuring the lease liability. Okay, lease liability remeasurement. So this lease liability remeasurement would be applicable to the remaining lease payments. No? Now we know for year 2023, 2024, 23-24 year, we have to pay 7 million. Since the payments are in advance and now we are on here lease liability remeasurement on 1st April 2023. So this 7 million payment, the first payment, the 7 million payment is due on 1st April 2023. Accordingly, it is not needed to be present valued again or discounted again. Therefore, the discounting factor for that would be 1. Why? It is already at the present value. Right? Then for next year, 24-25 year, again we have to pay 7 million. Again we have to pay 7 million, but now we have to discount that. So 1 divided by 1 plus R. So you can use the formula, but here in Excel I am using a shortcut. So accordingly, the present value would be 6.09. Okay. Then for the next year, 25-26, now we have to pay 7.5 million. Now we have to pay 7.5 million. The discount rate would be, or else the discounting factor at 15% discount rate would be 0.756. 0.756. The present value is 5.67. Then 26-27, then 26-27 financial year, again 7.5 million, the discount rate is 0.658, the present value would be 4.93. 4.93. So once I take the present value of the total, or else once I get the total present value after discounting, I got 23.69. I got 23.69. Okay, you also calculate and drop a message or else unmute and say whether the answer I got is accurate according to your calculation or not. Tell me whether your answers and my answers are same. Do the calculation. Yes, Amil has received the same answer. Good. How about
Okay,
that?
sir. Correct.
Okay, good. Fine. Now we have the remeasured lease liability. So here I can take this remeasured lease liability. Now you can see before the modification we had a liability worth 20.41 million, which represents the present value of future lease payments. Now after the modification, it has increased up to 23.69. So what we can assume here is the lease payments have been increased. Lease payments have been increased, right? So now you can take the difference here. What you can take is, now we have to increase the lease liability by 3.28. So how we need to pass the entry? What should be the double entry? Tell me.
ROU as a debit, liability credit.
Exactly. We have to credit the liability and debit the right of use asset. So right of use asset after modification would be 23.26. So the double entry will be here. The double entry that we are passing would be here. Debit to right of use asset 3.28 and credit to lease liability 3.28. 3.28. This is the double entry we are passing. The double entry we are passing. Okay. For the remeasurement. For the remeasurement. So you can make a note of on this. But this is not what they ask in, right? If you do this, you will get some amount of marks, but not all. Why? The question is discuss how to recognize the lease referred to above in the financial statements for the year ending 31st March 2024. Now, you need to mention how we are going to recognize this in financial year ending 31st March 2024. So you need to say that, okay, you need to say that the remeasured lease liability 23.69 need to be amortized, right? Need to be amortized using 15% interest rate. 15% interest rate and the right of use asset after remeasurement, which is 23.26. the right of use asset after remeasurement 23.26 need to be depreciated over remaining 4 years. Right? So you need to mention that. මේක මෙහෙම තමයි කරන්න ඕනේ කියලා. Why? They are asking not to illustrate but to discuss. Therefore, you need to narratively write that one. Narratively write. Okay? After that, you can illustrate it using financial statement extracts. So here, after I narratively write that one, now I am going to show the movement. So let's take opening balance. Opening balance on 1st April 2023. What is the opening balance? Opening balance is the last year closing. Last year closing in the sense before any remeasurement effects, right? Therefore, my opening lease liability is 20.41. Then I need to adjust what? I need to adjust the effect of remeasurement. Now I need to adjust the effect of remeasurement. How much? It is 3.28. It is 3.28. So now I have 23.69. So the payments are in advance. So when payments are in advance, we are first deducting the payment and then calculating the interest, or we are calculating the interest and deducting the payment. What's the order we have to follow? If the payments are in advance,
We must deduct initially.
exactly. So first we need to deduct the payments. Payment. How much is the payment? It is 7 million. Payment is 7 million. Okay. That is the payment 23-24 payment. 7 million. Okay. Then I can get the value here. It's an subtotal. It's a subtotal. For this 16.69, I can add interest. For this value, I can add interest at 15%. I can add interest at 15% for 16.69. So I got 2.5. Now I can get the closing balance. It is 19.19. It is 19.19. This is the closing balance as at 31st March 2024. As at 31st March 2024. The closing balance. The same movement need to be shown for the right of use asset. Opening balance. How much? Last year closing, that means 19.98. Before any modification. Then for that, I have to add the effect of remeasurement. Now I have 23.26, which is the what? 23.26 is the remeasured right of use asset. Here 23.26. Okay. Now from that I need to deduct the depreciation, or you can say amortization, whatever. Depreciation or amortization. So how to get that answer? 23.26 divided by 4. 23.26 divided by 4. Divided by 4. So I got 5.81. Accordingly, I can get the closing balance as 17.44, which is the closing balance as at 31st March 2024. 17.44. So if you do this entire thing, you will get how many marks? 5 marks. You will get 5 marks. So only thing is you need to narratively write these things. Sometimes with standard reference, or else if you are not more comfortable with standard references, fine. No need. At least as per SLFRS 16 කියලා කියන්න. So we identified the amount before modification, then we accounted it, and then as they are asking how we are presenting or how we need to account this in 2324 year, we shall show the movement. We shall show the movement. So that is how that question is structured. So it is for 5 marks. It is for 5 marks. Is that clear? Any doubts? Is that clear?
Yes, it is clear.
Okay, great. How about the others? Thank you, Amelia. How about the others? I guess others also fine. If you have any doubts, you can ask. Okay, now since no questions, let's move on to the next past paper. Let's move on to the next past paper. So this is done, 23 June done. So 2022 December. 2022 December, question number 1A. Question number 1A. Let's read. Let's first see the requirement. Advise here. Action verb is to advise. That means you cannot just show calculations. You cannot just show calculations. You need to write. You need to write. Okay. So keep in your mind, your entire exam paper will have questions as advice and sometimes explain, elaborate. Okay. There can be a least chance to get a question at your level just to illustrate or show or calculate. Okay, so what's the reason? Because your level is strategic level. So now you are in a capacity not as a accounts executive or an accountant, or sometimes what I can say is you are not in a capacity of a finance manager. So you are thinking in the point of view of a CFO. That's why in SL1 ABR, the CFO's point of view has been brought. Okay, so if you are thinking on a CFO's point of view, you need holistic understanding. You are in an advisory role now. Okay, you are in an advisory role. Therefore, when you build up an answer, that strategic flow need to be there. Strategic flow need to be there. You can't just write answers as you wish. So you need to have a proper flow. That's what I'm teaching. Now, if you go through and look at answers that I ask you to write, all those answers have a proper flow. I have given it in a proper flow with references. Okay. So that flow need to be there when you are writing the exam questions. Clear? Now let's read the question. So here, what the requirement? Advise the management on the accounting treatment for the lease mentioned above with necessary calculations for the years ended 31st March 2021 and 31st March 2022. It is for 2 years. That's why you are given 12 marks. Guys, 12 marks. Sometimes this might be a game changing question. Making wage pass එක fail එක decide වෙනවා වෙන්න පුළුවන්. මේකෙන් වගේ price එක decide වෙනවා වෙන්න පුළුවන්. Okay? හරි. For 2 years. Now you need to give that answer. Let's see. Omron PLC is an entity listed on the Colombo Stock Exchange. Its financial year begins on 1st April and ends on 31st March of the subsequent calendar year. Omron entered into an agreement with the supplier. Omron entered into an agreement with the supplier to lease out machinery for its manufacturing operations on 1st April 2019. So please tell me who is the lessee here? Who is the lessee here?
Supplier.
Who is the lessee here?
The Omron.
Omron. Yes, Omron is the lessee. Why? From a supplier, Omron is the person who is taking. Therefore, lessee is on-road. Lessor is the supplier. Clear? If you go this point wrong, then your entire answer will be wrong. Right? Okay, so lessee on-road. And then the commencement date. What is the commencement date? Commencement date of the lease?
1st April 2019.
Exactly. 1st April 2019. 1st April 2019. Good. Okay, commencement date done. Then payments are in advance or in arrears? Okay, for a period of 5 years at a fixed annual payment of 12 million. So the payment is fixed, payable on 1st April of each year. So now I'm asking payments in advance or in arrears?
Advance.
Exactly. Payments in advance. Good. Then the machine has a total economic life of 10 years. The fixed annual payments includes 11 million for rent and 1 million for maintenance. So in the very first session that I started SLFRS 16, under the introduction, I asked you to take down a note, or else I even draw it in my flowchart on these things: rent and maintenance. So what is the concept underlying to this sentence? What's the concept? Rent. Yes, rent is the rent that we pay in respect of getting the right of use. Then what is this maintenance? It is identified as a what? Tell me. It is identified as what? I told you in a lease, there can be lease components and mono components there. One summary balance, lease components and tell me මොකක් හරි එකක් කියන්න බලන්න.
Non-lease component.
Exactly, lease components and unleased components. The lease components and unleased components දෙකම තියෙද්දි අපි මොකක්ද කිව්වේ? අපි මොකක්ද කිව්වේ? lease components and unleased components තියෙද්දි මොකක්ද කිව්වේ?
Practical expedited.
Yes, but before going for that, what's the exact treatment here? If you are not applying practical experience, here para 12, what it says: for a contract, an entity shall account for each lease component within the contract as a lease separately from non-lease components. So I have drawn it in the summary also. We need to separately account for the lease component. Okay, that's what we can only consider for the lease liability calculation. The non-lease component need to be charged to P&L accounting using other standards. Okay, therefore, when calculating the lease liability, we can use only this 11 million. We can use only this 11 million. Clear? But a company can apply a practical expedient which is mentioned in para 15. Here, as a practical expedient, a lessee may elect by class of underlying asset not to separate non-lease component from lease component. So, if a lessee elects that practical expedient, then that lessee do not need to split it between lease and non-lease. They can account this entire 12 million as a lease component. Right? අපි බලමු practical expedient එක ගැන මෙයා මොකක්ද කියන්නේ කියලා. Okay? Then here, preliminary expenses related to the lease were 1.5 million per the agreement. 50% of the preliminary expenses were reimbursed by the supplier. So preliminary expenses, these are identified as initial direct cost. If you can remember, in the cost of the right of use asset, we are recognizing the initial lease liability plus initial direct cost. So This is the initial direct cost, and we can capitalize only the part that the lessee bears. Then an addendum to the initial agreement was signed. An addendum to the initial agreement. So if we are signing an addendum, that means this is what? Addendum එක sign කරනවා කිව්ව මොන වෙලාවටද? Tell me. If we are signing an addendum, that means what? This is a lease modification. Exactly. This is a lease modification. Good. An addendum to the initial lease agreement was signed on 1st April 2021. That means after 2 years, which increased the annual payment by 10% every 2 years starting from 1st April 2021. Also, the total agreement period was increased to 8 years. Here, initially we had entered into a lease term of 5 years. Now it has increased up to 8 years. It has increased up to 8 years. Okay. It has increased up to 8 years. The implicit interest rate for the lease at 1st April 2019 and 1st April 2021 was 10% and 15% respectively. The management of Omron does not expect to apply the practical expedient in recognizing non-lease components. If the management is not applying practical expedient, that means tell me how we need to treat the non-lease component, which is the maintenance cost. Do we need to consider it for the lease liability computation, or else we need to charge it to the P&L? What do you think? If the practical expedient is not applied,
Non-lease component to P&L.
exactly, we need to charge the non-lease component into P&L. Okay, so advise the management on the accounting treatment for the lease mentioned above with necessary calculations for the year ended 31st March 2021 and 31st March 2022. Okay, fine. So we have to start this from initial measurement. Why? Initial recognition එකේ ඉඳන්ම අපිට කියන්න වෙනවා. Why? What's the reason? Because in this question, they have not given that Omron has accounted it. No? So they are in a need that how we need to initially measure and then how we need to subsequently measure in year ending 31st March 2021 and 2022. So we need to start from what? Initial recognition. So here, first thing, we need to mention that the commencement date is 1st April 2019 and we identify the lease term as 5 years where the payments are in advance. Accordingly, from the commencement date, okay, accordingly from the commencement date, the lessee shall recognize a right of use asset and a lease liability. ඔන්න ඔය ටික අපි කියන්න ඕන. Okay, let's write the answer. Let's build up the answer. Let's build up the answer. So what we have to say here? First, we need to say, Omron, within bracket you can say lessee, is required to recognize a right of use asset and a lease liability in the commencement date or on the commencement date of the lease. On the commencement date of the lease, which is 1st April 2019. Which is 1st April 2019. Okay. Which is 1st April 2019. As per SLFRS 16. You can give even the paragraph reference. It's fine. So we mentioned that as per SLFRS 16. Then what else? Then you need to say at initial measurement, at initial recognition, let's say, at initial recognition, right of use asset need to be measured at cost, while the lease liability shall be measured at the present value of lease payments, that are unpaid at the commencement date of the lease. 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 And that's what first you have to mention. You can enhance this answer. I'm just giving a sample considering the time. So you can enhance and you can add anything to this, right? Okay. Now what you can say is, you can mention, or else you can do a work in computation of initial lease liability. Computation of lease liability at 1st April 2019. Computation of lease liability at 1st April 2019. No. Before that, we need to mention another thing. What is that? Before that, we need to mention another thing. What is that?
Preliminary expenses.
Not actually preliminary. අනිත් එක. Lease liability එක measure කරද්දී අපි ගන්න only 11 million කියලා කියන්න ඕනේ. This one.
Unleased component.
Unleased component. Exactly. You need to mention that as well. When computing the lease liability, as Omron is not applying the practical expedient, only the lease component, which is 11 million, can be considered. The non-lease component, 1 million, the non-lease component, 1 million maintenance charge need to be recorded in profit or loss in each year. Need to be recorded in profit or loss in each year. Is right, ne? Ekane කරන්න තියෙන්නේ. Need to be recorded in profit or loss in each year. Okay. Done. Sorry. Okay. Now we can compute the initial lease liability. So here we need the year. No, you can use the annuity factor. Okay, we can use the annuity factor since 12 million fixed payment. Okay, since 12 million fixed payment, we can use the annuity factor, no issue. But when using Excel, it's really hard to compute annuity factor. So I will use the table. You can, in the book, you can work it out using annuity factor, no issue. So here, discounting factor at implicit interest rate. Discounting factor at implicit interest rate. Then the present value. Then the present value. Okay. So these are payable from 1st April 2019, right? From 1st April 2019. But since the payments are in advance, the 1st April 2019 payment, okay, 1st April 2019 payment will not form a part of this. Therefore, we need to take only the payment in 2020 2021, 2022, 2023. Okay. So 5 years. That's how the 5 years comes, right? So year one is 1920. Then 2021, 21, 22, 22, 23, 23, 24. That's how the 4 years are going on. That's how the 4 years are going on. Okay. So cash flow 12 million. Cash flow 12 million. Cash flow 12 million. So discount in fact at 10%. 1 divided by 1 plus 10%. So it is 0.909. This is year one. No? This is year one. Then this divided by 1.1. Okay. Then I can get the present value. I can get the present value here. So I got initial lease liability as 38.04. If you have calculated using annuity factor or whatever, tell me whether the answer I get is equal to the answer you got.
මේක 11න් නෙමෙයිද මේව කරන්න ඕන?
Sorry. 11 million තමයි. කලින් 11 million කියලා 12000 හැදුවානේ. It should be 11.
Now okay.
Now okay, right? So
Yes.
34.87. උඩ 11 කියලා මෙතන 12000 හැදුවානේ. Okay. Fine. Then we need to compute what? We need to compute the right of use asset. Computation of right of use asset at 1st April 2019. So this comprises what? Initial lease liability 34.87 plus what? Lease payment on 1st April 2019. Lease payment on 1st April 2019, which is the initial payment. 11 million. 11 million. 11 million. Then apart from that, I have to add what? Initial direct cost of lessee. How much is the initial direct cost of lessee?
$0.75 million.
Exactly. 1.5 into 50%. 0.75 million. 0.75 million. So I have what? I have cost of right of use asset 46.62 million. 46.62 million. Good. Okay. Now I have computed the lease liability and the right of use asset. Then what we have to mention? Now we need to guide the, now this is an advice. No? Now we need to guide and advise the management of Omron on subsequent measurement. Okay, subsequent measurement. So we can put a subtopic here. Subsequent measurement. Subsequent measurement. Then we can guide them. How? The lease liability. The lease liability shall be subsequently measured by increasing the lease liability at the amount of interest. At the amount of interest calculated based on implicit interest rate and decrease in the lease liability by the amount of lease payments. That's how the standards say. What is the paragraph for the subsequent measurement? Just look at and tell me. Just look at the standard and tell me what is the paragraph for this one. Lease liability subsequent measurement. Paragraph. Exactly. Paragraph number 36. Right? Paragraph number 36. So you can even give the reference. Para 36. Okay, done. Then the right of use asset. The right of use asset shall be subsequently measured using cost model unless revaluation or fair value models are applied. Unless revaluation model or fair value models are applied. Okay. Accordingly, Omron have to measure the right of use asset using cost model by depreciating the cost of right of use asset over දැන් මොකද ඔන්න ඔතන ප්‍රශ්නයක් එනවා over the lease term or over the useful lifetime. What do you think?
Whichever is lower.
I didn't get you.
Whichever is lower.
Whichever is lower. Why? What's the reason? What's the reason here? Because the ownership is not getting transferred at the end of the lease term. එහෙම information එකක් දීලා නැහැනේ. Clear? So by depreciating the cost over the lower of useful life or lease term, as the ownership will not get transferred. Ownership will not get transferred to Omron at the end of the lease term. At the end of the lease term. At the end of the lease term. හරිනේ. මාරු වෙන්නේ නැහැ. Will not get transferred to Omron at the end of the lease term. Therefore, 5 years. Therefore, right of use asset need to be depreciated over the lease term, which is 5 years. Need to be depreciated over the lease term, which is 5 years. Which is 5 years. හරි. දැන් අපි මොකද කරන්නේ? දැන් අපි පළවෙනි අවුරුද්ද subsequently measure කරනවා. Okay? Subsequent measurement. Okay? Subsequent measurement in financial year 1920. Subsequent measurement in financial year 1920. So we can take the opening balance. opening balance. So first let's do the lease liability. Lease liability. Opening balance. Opening balance is at 1st April 2019. Opening balance at 1st April 2019. That's what we calculated. 34.87 lease liability. So this is a payment in advance, right? This is a payment in advance. If the payment is made in advance, we need to first deduct the payment, right? So removing payment. Payment. How much is the payment? For year 1920, how much is the payment?
11 million.
Do we need to deduct that here? Do we need to
No,
deduct that?
no, all deducted.
Exactly. We do not need to deduct it in the first year. Why? We have taken it directly to the right of asset carrying amount. It is not reflected in the 34.87. Therefore, no payment need to be deducted. Accordingly, I can calculate. Accordingly, here I can calculate the balance after payment, which is subtotal, which is just a subtotal. And for this, I have to add interest. I have to add interest at 10%. I have to add interest at 10%. I have to add interest at 10%. Then I can get the closing balance. Closing balance at 31st March 2009, 31st March 2020. 31st March 2020. So here I have 38.36. 38.36. 38.36. Please tell me, is the answer is okay with you? Are there any differences with your calculation and my calculation?
No, sir.
It is okay.
Fine. Accordingly, now let's go with right of use asset. Right of use asset. So I have my opening balance. Right of use asset opening balance 46.62. From that I need to deduct depreciation. Depreciation. Cost will be depreciated over 5 years, right? So how to calculate that? 46.62 divided by 5. 46.62 divided by 5. Accordingly, I have my closing balance as 37.29. I have my closing balance as 37.29. Okay. Now, this is the financial year 1920. Now, I need to calculate this. Why? Because if you see, the addendum was made on 1st April 2021. So, these carrying amounts that I calculated are the carrying amounts before the addendum. That means before the modification, right? Now, tell me, based on this addendum, this is a separate lease or this will result in a remeasurement. This is
Remeasurement.
yes, this is not a separate list. Why? What's the reason of not
No
considering
scope
this as
increase.
a separate list?
No scope increase.
Exactly, no increase in the scope. Okay. Now we need to provide guidance on the lease modification. Now we need to mention information about the lease modification. So here, what you can refer is as per paragraph 44. Okay, as per paragraph 44, a lease modification will be accounted as a separate lease only if both scope and consideration increase commensurate with the market prices. Commensurate with the market prices.
Yes, please,
But
sir.
yes,
So මේක දැන් 21ට carrying values ගන්න ඕනද?
නෑ මෙතන දැන් අපෙන් අහන්නේ 1st April 2021 වලටනේ. දැන්
අපිට ආවි 20ට.
sorry. We got it for 2020 නේ. හරි.
Yes.
අපිට 20 ඊළඟ අවුරුද්දටත් ගන්න වෙනවා. Yes.
ඒක
Sorry.
ඔය ඇතුළෙම දාන්න පුළුවන්.
පුළුවන්. අපි මෙහෙම දාමු. Sorry. I made a mistake there. අපි මෙහෙම කරමු. මෙතන මේක මම මෙහෙම අයින් කරන්නම්. අපි මේ ටේබල් එකම ගමු subsequent measurement in financial year 1920 and 2021. හරිනේ? එහෙම කරමු. හරි. අපි මේකටම දාගමු මේක. So this is 1920. This is 1920. මේක 2021. හරි මේක මේ මගේ ඔළුවේ තිබ්බේ 1st April 2020 වල මේක වෙනවා. It's 1st April 2021 is good. So for the next year, lease liability I have 38.36. Now I have to deduct the payment, ne? Now I have to deduct the payment. Here the 11 million. Now I have to deduct the payment 11 million. හරි නේද? බලන්න හදලා බලන්න. මෙහෙම දෙන්නේ කියලා. 30.09 දෙන්නේ කියලා හදලා බලන්න. මට හදලා කියන්න මේ ආන්සර්ස් මදාවේ කියලා.
ඔව් approximately okay.
ඔව් නේ ළඟින් යනවානේ. rounding
Yes.
off effects තියෙන්න පුළුවන්. Okay, so it's done, right? This part is quite straightforward now. So let's move on to the lease modification thing. Let's move on to the lease modification again. So what I was discussing here is this a lease modification not accounted as a separate lease. So here, but in this scenario, we can say, but in this scenario, only the lease payments and the lease term gets increased. Accordingly, this required to be recognized as a remeasurement of the lease liability using revised payments at revised discount rate applying para 45. Applying para 45. හරිනේ 45 වලනේ ඔය කතාව කියන්නේ. Applying para 45. Okay. Done. Okay. Now what we can do? Let's remeasure the lease liability. Remeasurement of lease liability at 1st April 2021. Remeasurement of lease liability at 1st April 2021. So I need the table again like previous. Let me take it. Okay. So now we are in 1st April 2021. Okay. So 1st April 2021 means it is from year 2021 2022. Okay. 21 22, 22 23, 23 24, 24 25. Okay. Then 25 26. Okay. හරිද අවුරුදු ගන්න නැත්නම් තව වෙනස් වෙන්න ඕනද? What they are saying? They are saying the total agreement period was increased to 8 years. Increased to 8 years. Now we are doing this addendum after how many years? After how many years from the initial agreement?
2 years.
After 2 years. That means from the initial agreement, we have remaining 3 years. Right? We have remaining 3 years. And this is extended by another 3 years. So remaining 3 years, here, these 3 are remaining 3 years. And I need to increase it by another 3 years. Therefore, it will go until 26, 27. Am I correct? Am I correct? What do you think? හරිනේ නේ මේ බලන්න අපි කලින් එකට ගියොත් මෙන්න මේ දැන් 19 20 අපි මෙතෙන්ට අරන් නැහැ නේ. ඒතර 19 20 20 21 ගියා. ඒතර 21 22 22 23 23 24 මෙතනින් ඉතුරු වුණා. හරිනේ ඒ තුනනේ දැන් අපි මෙතන මුලට අරන් තියෙන්නේ. හරි ඊට අමතරව තව තුනක් ඇඩ් වෙනවා. 5 to 8 නේ. Okay clear. Then I need to take the cash flows. I need to take the cash flows. How to get the cash flows? An addendum to the initial agreement was signed on 1st April 2021, which increased the annual payment by 10% every year starting from 1st April 2021. So now earlier, the payment was 11 million. It need to be increased by 10%. That means I am multiplying this by 110. So I got is 12.1 million. ඒ විදිහට අවුරුදු දෙකක් 12.1 මිලියන් යනවා. ඊට පස්සේ මොකද වෙන්නේ? ආයෝක 110කින් වැඩි වෙනවා. ආයෝක 110කින් වැඩි වෙනවා. 13.31 වෙනවා. ඒ විදිහට අවුරුදු දෙකක් යනවා. ඊට පස්සේ ආයෝක 110කින් වැඩි වෙනවා. ඒ විදිහට අවුරුදු දෙකක් යනවා. every 2 years නේ. අවුරුදු දෙකෙන් දෙකට. හරි නේද? Are you clear? Are you clear? Let's go and check in the answers also. Yes, that's correct. Okay. Clear. Now, we are on 1st April 2021. Tell me, do we need to discount this first 12.10? Do we need to discount this first payment?
No.
No. Why? What's the reason? Because this 12.1 million is due on 1st April 2021 itself. So it is already at the present value. Now the discount rate should be changed to 15%. Okay. Revised discount rate. Revised discount rate, I will put it here within bracket 15%. 15%. Okay. So here the present value of the first payment will be same. Then I need to calculate the discount rate. Divide by 1.15. 1.15. So I apply the same here. So I got 57.09. You also just manually calculate and tell me whether you got the same answer. Done the, shall we move on?
It is okay.
Okay, good. So now we have remeasured the lease liability, right? We have remeasured the lease liability. Now we need to get the impact. So let's take lease liability before remeasurement. Lease liability before remeasurement. Lease liability before remeasurement, we calculated, right? It was 30.09. It was 30.09. So now we have the lease liability after remeasurement. It is 57.09. That means the effect of remeasurement is how much? The effect of remeasurement, it is 27. The effect of remeasurement is 27. 27. So for this one, I have to pass the entry. How to pass that entry? Debit to right of use asset by 27, credit to lease liability 27. So accordingly, I can get, okay, accordingly I can get what? The right of use asset also here. Right of use asset before remeasurement. Right of use asset before remeasurement. Right of use asset before remeasurement. I had 27.97, right? Then I am adding the remeasurement effect. Then I have the right of use asset after remeasurement as 54.97. 54.97. Okay. Fine. Hope the entry is clear. Now what we have to say? Now what we have to say? Now we need to say subsequent measurement. Now again we need to give guidance on subsequent measurement in financial year 21-22. Subsequent measurement in financial year 21-22. तर අපි කියන්න ඕන කොහොමද? The remeasured lease liability. The remeasured lease liability at 1st April 2021 shall be amortized using the revised implicit interest rate 15% and the right of use asset and the remeasured right of use asset shall be depreciated over remaining lease term 8 years. Remaining lease term 8 years. It shall be shown as follows. It shall be shown as follows. Let's show the financial year movement. It can be shown as follows. Let's show the movement. So let me copy this one. Okay, so this is year 21-22. Okay, so we have opening balance. Opening balance is coming from prior year closing. We calculated, right? What is that? Prior year closing 30.09. That is the lease liability before remeasurement. Then we need to add the remeasurement impact. We need to add the effect of remeasurement. We need to add the effect of remeasurement, which is 27. Okay. Fine. Now from that, I need to deduct the revised payment. 21-22 payment, revised payment, which is 12.1. Which is 12.1. Now I can get the lease liability after payment. For that, I have to add the interest at 15%. For that, I have to add the interest at 15%. Then the closing balance can be computed. then the closing balance can be computed as 51.74. The right of use asset also same. Right of use asset opening balance, which is the last year closing 27.97. For that, I have to add the effect of remeasurement 27. Then I need to depreciate how much? Now I need to depreciate the remeasured right of use asset, which is 54.97 here, which is 54.97. So it is 54.97 divided by remaining 8 years. Remaining 8 years. Remaining 8 years. I got 6.87. So closing balance would be 48.10. Closing balance would be 48.10.
So depreciated over 6 years.
Sorry. Depreciation over remaining lease term, not 8 years, it is 6 years. Sorry, I made a mistake here. 8 ne total remaining high, yes. Metana depreciate over remaining 6 years. Please change it. Depreciate over remaining lease term 6 years. Okay, I changed it. So accordingly, I got the closing balance of right of use asset as 45.81. 45.81. Done.
So අර initially තිබ්බ 1 million expense එක අපි දැන් initially විදියට 5 ඇතුළෙම allocate කරලා යනවද?
නෑ මෙතන කියන්නේ annual payment එක 1 million නේ. එතකොට
Yes.
ඒක the revised එකේ කොහොමද කියලා නෑනේ.
නෑ.
revised එකේ ඒ 1 million උත් සමහරට 10% increase වෙනවා ඇති. right? එතකොට ඒක දැන් පළවෙනි අවුරුදු දෙකේ කියන්නේ 19 20 21 1 million P&L charge කරනවා. ඊට පස්සේ 21 22 22 23 ඒකට 10% ගහලා P&L charge කරනවා. ඒ විදිහට අර non lease component එකත් මේ වගේම inflate වෙවි යනවා. But anyway, the accounting treatment should be charged into P&L. We have to nothing to worry with that. The examiner's requirement is of speaking on the lease liability.
Yes.
So we initially said the non-lease component will be charged to P&L. That's fine. That's enough. Hari. Clear? Make okay. This is kind of a comprehensive question. That's why they have given 12 marks. Starting from initial measurement to subsequent measurement. සම්පූර්ණයෙන්ම තිබ්බා ඒක. Okay, any doubts before moving to the next question? I guess no. Shall we go for the next one? Yanda. Okay. හරි. සද්ද බද්ද නැති හින්දා මං හිතනවා තේරෙන්නේ නැති කියලා. අපි යන් ඊළඟ ප්‍රශ්නෙට 2021 February. February. Okay. This one. Let's see. Green PLC entered into a 5-year lease agreement to obtain a property for its showroom in Malabe at an annual rental of 500,000 payable at the beginning of each year. Accordingly, the first rental was paid at the beginning of the first year. The lease agreement provides an option for lessee to extend the lease period for a further 5 years at an annual rental of 550,000, which should be payable at the beginning of each year. At the commencement of the lease, Green PLC decided that the location of this property was very important for its operations and there are no similar alternative properties in this area. The company uses cost model to measure right-of-use assets. The remaining useful life of the property is 20 years. At the beginning of the lease, Green PLC paid 50,000 as a commission to the agent who arranged the lease. Green PLC's incremental borrowing rate is 13% per annum. Required. Advise Green PLC on initial and subsequent measurements of the above lease in the book of company as per SLFRS 16 with required calculations. Okay. Then advise Green PLC on the impact on its financial statements if at the end of the third year the company decides to close down the showroom at the end of the fifth leased year. Since it does not add significant value to the company as expected, assume that Green PLC's incremental borrowing rate at the end of third year is 15% per annum. Okay. අපි දෙවනි කෑල්ලට පස්සේ යමු. දෙවනි කෑල්ලට පස්සේ යමු. Now I am asking a few questions. Okay. So tell me, who is the lessee here?
Green PLC.
Exactly. Lessee Green PLC. Okay. Then lease term?
5 years.
Is
10
it
years.
5 years or 10 years?
10 years.
Yes, exactly. It should be 10 years. Why? Because if you can remember, I told you lease term, when deciding the lease term, we need to consider optional extension periods and optional termination periods if those are reasonably certain to exercise. That reasonably certain or that reasonability will depend on whether we have an economic incentive to do so. Now, if you look at this question, it clearly say at the commencement date, the Green PLC has decided that the location of this property is very important. And there are no similar properties. Now, if they do not have any similar properties, they will be residing in the same property for as long as they can. Therefore, they have an economic incentive to use this extension option. Clear? Therefore, the lease term should be not just 5 years, which is the non-cancelable period. It shall be 10 years, adding the optional extension period. Okay. So, in this question, it is vital to mention that you will be allocated marks. අනිත් ටික සාමාන්‍ය විදිහටම තමයි තියෙන්නේ. ඒ නිසා අපි පළවෙනි ප්‍රශ්නෙට address කරමු. Initial and subsequent measurements. Very easy. So let's build up the answer. Let's build up the answer. Here, let's say at the commencement date, what is the commencement date here? They have not given an year neither. Commencement date tag specially අපිට කියලා නැහැ නේ. At the commencement date, the lessee, at the commencement date, Green PLC lessee shall recognize a right of use asset and a lease liability. The right of use asset shall be measured at cost initially, while the lease liability shall be measured at the present value of unpaid lease payments. At the commencement date at the commencement date of the lease discounted using implicit interest rate. But in absence of an implicit interest rate, the lessee's incremental borrowing rate can be used. The lessee's incremental borrowing rate can be used. Accordingly, you need to mention, accordingly, Green PLC shall discount the cash flows or else discount the lease payments using 13% IBR. 13% IBR. The lease term, we need to mention on that. The lease term shall be both the non-cancelable period plus any optional extension period if the exercise of the extension is reasonably certain. In this situation, we can say in this situation, as the property is very important, and no any alternative properties, it is reasonable to extend the lease term. Accordingly, 10 years shall be considered as the lease term. 10 years shall be considered as the lease term. 10 years shall be considered as the lease term. Okay, is that clear? I told two things. One is the initial recognition, and then other one is about the lease term where the examiner is highlighting that one. So if the examiner is highlighting, you need to address that. Okay? Fine. Now let's go for the initial measurement. Initial measurement. So first, lease liability. Here, cash flow discounting factor at 13%, the present value. Discounting factor at 13%. Discounting factor at 13%. So it is 10 years, right? Now 1 to 10 අපිට හදා ගන්න වෙනවා. මේ cash flows උත් වෙනස් වෙනවානේ. 9, 10. Okay. Cash flows. Payable at the beginning. So first year payment we shall not consider. Why? It will be included in the right of use asset. Payments are in the beginning is up. So 500,000. Yeah. So the payments would be 500,000. 500,000.
Extend වෙනවා නම් 550 වෙනව නේද sir?
extend වෙන period එකට 550. extend වෙනවා නම් මුලේ කොටත් මේ 550 නෙමෙයි. extend වෙන period එකට විතරයි 550.
No, sir. It has said for the whole period it's 550.
කොහොමද එහෙම කියන්නේ? Where does it say like that? The
It
lease
should be payable at the beginning of each year.
Yes, please listen now. Let's read the question again. Green PLC entered into a 5-year lease agreement to obtain a property for its showroom at an annual rental of 500,000 payable at the beginning of the each year. So the first 5-year lease period, it is only 500,000 payable. Okay, now keep that thing as fixed. Then read the second one. Accordingly, the first annual rental was paid in the beginning of the first year. Fine, done. That means 50,000 we have paid. Okay. Then the lease agreement provides an option for the lessee to extend the lease period for a further 5 years. Now, this is where we start to discuss on further 5 years. So, to extend the lease period for a further 5 years at an annual rental of 550,000, which should be payable at the beginning of the each year. Now, that is for the second period. For the second 5 years, we have to pay 550,000, which should be payable at the beginning of the each year in that extending period. Okay. Extend කරනවා කියලා මුලේවටත් එක්ක 550,000 ගෙවන්න වෙන්නේ නැහැ කවදා. That's not the case. That's not the rationale. Okay. So for the extended period, we have to pay 550,000. That's how you need to calculate. If not, it's wrong. If you consider 550,000 from the beginning, then it's wrong. Utterly wrong. Okay. So then 1 divided by 1 plus 13%. 1 plus 13%. Okay. So I can get the discounting factors divided by 1.13. So here I got my present values. Let's do it like this. 1 plus 13%. Yes, okay. So I have my present values now. So the total present value is 2.673 million. So this is the initial lease liability. This is the initial lease liability. Okay. Now, after measuring the initial lease liability, we have to go for the right of use asset. So within that, I have initial lease liability, which is 2.6 million. For that, I have to add what? For that, I have to add the initial payment. Initial payment. The first year's payment, 500,000. The first year's payment, 500,000. Then, again, I have to add initial direct cost. How much? Initial direct cost. Here, at the beginning of the lease, Green PLC paid 50,000 as a commission to the agent. So 50,000. Okay, accordingly, we have the right of use asset cost as 3.2 million. Cost of right of use asset as 3.2 million. Okay. Then, how we need to subsequently measure? Now we need to show the subsequent measurement. Since the examinee is not giving explicitly number of years, we need to do the subsequent measurement for the entire period. We need to do the subsequent measurement for the entire period. Okay. Or else you can write it and then calculate the subsequent measurement only for the first 3 years. Only for the first 3 years. එහෙම නවත්තන්නත් පුළුවන්. But since I am doing the calculation in the Excel, I will do it for the entire years. But at the exam, since the modification is done at the end of the 3 year, or else at the end of the 3rd year, you can do the subsequent measurement only up to 3 years. That's enough. That's enough. Manually ඔක හදන්න ගියාම පිස්සු හැදෙනවනේ. Either that's enough. Okay. But let me work it out for the entire period. මම full screen දාගෙන හදන්නම්. So subsequent measurement, same like in previous question, you need to mention that here. You need to mention that the lease liability shall be subsequently measured by increasing the lease liability at the amount of the interest based on now the incremental borrowing rate. Here it's incremental borrowing rate. And decreasing the lease liability by the amount of lease payments. Okay. Then the right of use asset. Here in this question, it is clearly mentioned that right of use asset shall be used to subsequently measure at cost model. Okay, cost model. Okay, so here we can use the same answer what we used previously by making a change. The right of use asset shall be subsequently measured using cost model. No need to say about other models. Okay, cost model. Accordingly, Green PLC have to depreciate the cost of right of use asset over the lower of useful life of the lease term, as the ownership will not get transferred at the end of the lease term. Therefore, right of use asset need to be depreciated over the lease term, which is how many years? Now we consider the lease term as just 5 years or 10 years.
10 years.
10 years, exactly, as 10 years. Okay. Done. So let me calculate subsequent measurement of lease liability. Year, opening balance, payment, opening balance after payment. අයක අපි අනිත් පැත්තට හදමු. ඒතකොට ලේසින්. කොහොම කරත් එකයිනේ මේ පැත්තට ES 10 ගමු. So we can take the opening balance. Then we need to deduct the payment. Then we have the opening balance after payment. For that, I have to add the interest. For that, I have to add the interest at 13%. I have to add the interest at 13%. So I have to add the interest at 13%. Then I can get the closing balance. So I have from year 1 to year 10. Year 1 to year 10. Okay. බලන්න අවුරුදු 3කට වල හදන්න. මැනුවලි හදන්න අවුරුදු 3කට. Opening balance. So I have the lease liability, the opening lease liability. Opening lease liability as 2673687. So year 1 payment we have already made, so nothing to do with that payment. Then we can get the payment after. Okay. So this is just a subtotal. Then for that I have to add the interest at 13%, then I can get the closing balance. Okay. Then next year opening would be the last year closing. Okay, done. Then payments. Payments we have to mention. So I will just directly put here 500,000. So we are paying 500,000 for these 5 years. Then it will be increased up to 550,000. Okay. Then I have to add interest. Yes. Once I add interest to all, the balances would be zero. This is subsequent measurement for 10 years. But keep in your mind, calculating it for first 3 years will be sufficient to answer this question. Okay, why the modification is happening on the year 3? Clear? So now let me put subsequent measurement of right of use asset. Okay. So here I have the opening balance. From that I need to deduct the depreciation. So opening balance, then I can get the closing balance. Okay. So opening cost of the right of use asset is 3.223 million. So I have that figure. Then I need to depreciate this opening cost. Okay, I need to depreciate this opening cost over how many years? 10 years. Over 10 years. So my annual depreciation will not be changed. So accordingly, I am doing the amortization schedule like this. Okay. So for the right of use asset also, it's sufficient for the first 3 years. Then what they are saying? Then we need to answer for the second question. What the second question again? In the second question, it say, if at the end of the third year, the company to close down the showroom at the end of 5th year lease term, since it does not add significant value. Now we need to remeasure the lease liability. Okay. Now we need to remeasure the lease liability. So let's say lease modification. We need to advise on that as well. Lease modification. We need to advise on that. So let's say, as the lease modification will not increase the scope, this will not be accounted as a separate lease, and will result in a remeasurement of the lease liability. Okay. So this will result in a remeasurement of the lease liability. Right? Fine. Now let's do that remeasurement. So Medana, you can refer para 45. Remeasurement of lease liability. Now, this decision is made on end of third year. Okay, at the end of third year, no? Okay. So now what I am doing is now I am remeasuring. So remeasurement of lease liability at the end of third year. At the end of third year. Okay. At the end of third year. Okay. So I need to take again these discounting factors and stuff. Okay, let's do that. So now we have to use the revised discount rate, which is 15%. Here, if you see, it is clearly mentioned that the revised discount rate is 15%. So the remaining cash flows we need to use, right? So we have only 2 years remaining. We have only 2 years remaining. We have only 2 years remaining. It's from the initial term. It's from the initial term. So from the initial term, 2 payments are pending now. 4th year payment and the 5th year payment. Right? 4th year payment and the 5th year payment. Now tell me, do I need to discount the 4th year payment? The
No.
payments are in advance. The payments are in advance. Do I need to discount the 4th year payment?
No need.
No need. Very good. So here it is 1. And then I have taken the second year discount rate 0.870. 0.870.
So can't we assume this 500,000 already paid?
Not actually. Why? I am doing this at the end of third year. The payment will have to be made in the first day of the 4th year. Are you clear? And even let's say, even we think this remeasurement of the lease liability is done at the beginning of the 4th year, we are assuming that no any payment has been made. Before making any payment, we are doing this reassessment. That's how the thinking pattern should be. Clear?
Okay. In
Oh.
advance mean not before the first of April.
Yes, not before the 1st of April. Right? So here, so I got now 934,783 as the remeasured lease liability. Now I need to record this impact. So I will take lease liability before remeasurement. Lease liability before remeasurement. කීයද? අපි remeasure කරන්න කලින් lease liability මේ අපි මේ ඔන්න amortize කරලා calculate කරගත්ත 2.654 million. Then I have lease liability after remeasurement. Lease liability after remeasurement. So lease liability අඩු වෙලා නේ තියෙන්නේ. Lease liability අඩු වෙලා. එහෙනම් දැන් අපිට ගන්න පුළුවන් effect of remeasurement. Effect of remeasurement. කීයද? Effect of remeasurement. I have got 1.7 million. 1.7 million. Okay. Now how to record this? I have to reduce the lease liability, right? I have to reduce the lease liability. Entry එකක් දානවා නම් කොහොමද දාන්නේ වෙන අපිට? Credit to lease liability ද debit to lease liability ද?
Debit to lease liability, credit right to us.
Exactly. Debit to lease liability 1.7 19622. Credit to right of use asset the same. This is how the entry would be. This is how the entry would be. එහෙනම් මම මේ විදිහටම මම ගන්නවා right of use asset එක දැන්. Right of use asset before remeasurement. Right of use asset before remeasurement 2.256 million. Making effect of remeasurement දැම්මට පස්සේ right of use asset after modification or else after remeasurement I have 536,000. Right of asset after remeasurement I have 536,959. 959. Okay. So that's all. That's all. Now, if you see, in every time XML has tested remeasurement. So that means lease modification. This time also he might test. Most probably he might test a reduction in the scope. Or a step දෙකක් apply කරන්න තියෙන එක. Just check. Just redo the question what I did, and that's all. So with this, I have marked the end of SLFRS 16 for you. Now from next week, I will start the balance part. Are you okay with that? Hope all is well.
Okay.
Okay, great. How about the others?
සර් මම මුල ටිකේ හිටියේ නැහැ.
Okay.
මම ස්කෝප් එක වැඩි වෙනවා නම් අපි normal අලුත්ම ලීස් එකක් විදියට accounts තියෙනවා ඒකද වෙනස?
ස්කෝප් එක වැඩි වෙනවා නම් සහ ඒ වැඩි වෙන ස්කෝප් එකට ගන්න ලීස් පේමන්ට් එක charge කරන ලීස් පේමන්ට් එක market rates වලටම charge කරනවා නම් without a discount due to the previous lease agreement, then it will be a separate lease. එහෙම නැත්නම් remeasurement ම තමයි. ඒකට මම summary එකක් දාලා තියෙනවා ටියුට් එකේ. මම පෙන්නන්නම් ඒක. මේ තියෙන summary බලන්න. මෙතන තියෙනවා increase in scope by adding one or more underlying asset. ඒක stand on selling price නා. ඒ කියන්නේ market value එකට නම් separate lease. market value නැතුව scope එක වැඩි වෙලා නම් remeasure කරලා තමයි යන්නේ. මෙන්න මේ summary බලන්න, මේ summary ඔක්කොම තියෙනවා.
share කරන්න පුළුවන්ද සර් group?
මේක ටියුට් එකේ තියෙන. ටියුට් එක නැද්ද ඔයාගාව?
බැලුවේ නැහැ.
බලන්න ටියුට් එකේ තියෙන්නේ මේ additional ඒවා නෙමෙයි ටියුට් එකේ තියෙන්නේ. හොයාගන්න බැරුව ගියොත් මට message එකක් දාන්න මම ටියුට් එක share කරන්නම් ඔයාලට.
හරි සර්. මම screenshot එකක් ගන්නවා.
All right, you can take a screenshot. And even if you don't have the टियුට්, please drop me a message. I will send. No issue with that. Okay. Hope others also fine. If so, we can finish the session. So it's sharp 9. Thank you very much. Let's meet next Sunday. Bye bye.
Thank you very much, sir. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Good night.